Welcome to the Health System CIO show. I'm your host, founder, and editor-in-chief, Anthony Guerra. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with JD Whitlock, CIO at Dayton Children's Hospital. JD, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here, Anthony.
All right, great. You want to start off by telling me a little bit about your organization and your role?
Sure thing. Dayton Children's is a small pediatric health system, about 850 million revenue, 230 bed hospital, 4,500 employees, Dayton, Ohio, Southwest Ohio. We're on Epic, we're on Workday, we are trying to compete with, we are competing, we successfully compete with larger organizations and doing all the things that one has to do to be a responsible health system in 2026. Here we are to talk about one of those sticky policy issues, right? I think that goes into that.
Yes, yes, and you used the word responsible. I think that's a really important word here. And let's just start here. In my experience doing this for quite a while, speaking of folks like yourselves, people like you feel very personally responsible for the data that is going through your health system. Personally responsible. It matters deeply to you. That's my perception. It's not just a job. It's not just casual. This is important to you. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And particularly in this topic where you have to balance patients' rights to their own data, right? And I feel pretty passionately about that, but passionate supporter of open notes for a long time. I in my previous organization, Bonscore Mercy Health, this goes back probably a dozen years where working with the clinical leadership there that believes strongly in open notes before we had to do open
Hmm.
notes. I should point that out, right? As a patient rights issue. So balancing that with just the things that we have to do in the legalities, and of course we don't want to be on the wall of shame, because we had a HIPAA breach because we did the wrong things, or in create what's happening now is, all these class action lawsuits, right? When
Yeah.
people are doing the things they're supposed to be doing, so they're not information blocking, and then they get class action lawsuits, right? That's what goes into the policy quagmire we're in now, and maybe even about to get worse, which is part of what we're
Yeah.
going to talk about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the word lawsuits, and that could be one of the nefarious things happening with your patient data, that it's going where you're supposed to be sending it, and there have been allegations and some confessions or admissions, it seems like, that some of that isn't being accessed for patient care use. It's being accessed to be sent for different kinds of lawsuits, so totally inappropriate use. So lots of lawsuits going around, lots of legal issues. Let's get into it. I mean, we're going to talk about TEFCA here. We're going to talk about, well, you got care quality as well, but we've got this dynamic where you're being told that you have to share data with these certain networks. And we've seen, not just recently, but over a number of years, even with care quality, issues. Let's be real vague so we can be safe here. But we've seen issues come up that give one concern. We've seen organizations removed from these exchanges because they weren't doing appropriate things. So something's going on. We've recently seen more issues around TEFCA. These are things that are in the courts. There's been, again, some admissions of these things going on. So you're sitting there, and as this steward who cares so much, trying to do what you're legally required to do, finding out that the destination of this data isn't where it should be. I mean, and I know you're outspoken about this, but just take me through sort of, this has got to be a wild evolution on like behind closed doors with you as you're seeing this stuff, learning this stuff, deciding who do I need to tell internally? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to communicate with? Whose counsel do I take on what I'm supposed to do here? I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do, and I don't think things are working out that great. I have some concerns. Take me through this.
Sure. So So you sort of alluded to the Health Gorilla case earlier. Obviously, that's all public knowledge. There's no reason we have to tiptoe around that one, right? So
Yep.
for probably most of your listeners know about that, but not all. So we perhaps should go into that at a high level, right? So Health Gorilla is a suit that Epic brought because Health Gorilla as one of the aggregators is the right what's the right word?
QHIN. QHIN.
QHIN that on TEFCA that was allowing some shady characters to grab patients' PHI and saying it was for treatment when it wasn't for treatment, and going as far as to make very small
Yes.
non-consequential edits to the clinical data to make it look like they were treating patients. Really some pretty bad stuff that is now has sort of come out
Hmm.
as I believe. Well, I should that's okay. That's the part I shouldn't comment on and how the case is going to fully play out, right?
Okay.
But
Okay.
it seems rather clear to most of us that there were some nefarious things going on, and many health systems signed on to a letter. Dayton Children's did uh, to ONC, or I'm sorry, to I think it's Sequoia Project
Yes.
and ONC, saying, "Hey, there has to be better standards because once somebody is on the network in the QHIN on TEFCA and they query, we don't have any choice. We can't stop and ask every time." Right, a query comes in. Well, wait a second. Is this really treatment? We have to trust, right? That T and TEFCA is trust. If the T goes away, it's not going to work. Um, so I don't really understand how anybody in the government thinks that if we want to advance interoperability, it's very specifically the government's role to set up the system so that we can have that trust. How anybody's supposed to have any trust in the system if there's not stronger controls on this, right? And the way that it's been set up with Sequoia and it's sort of this contracted relationship, like they're the boss of this, right? It's a little bit of like Joint Commission. It's not a government agency, but it might as well be a government regulator, right? With the power, that with a sort of pseudo regulatory power, right? That's how it's been set up. Okay, if we can't trust that the entities pulling the data are who they say they are and that they're in fact using the data for what they say they're using it for, but we don't have any choices, so we're information blocking if we don't share that data, right? And so the real insane part of this was that out of that, some health systems had tossed their name in the hat um, with this lawsuit. So they were putting their names out there saying, "Hey, we're concerned, like we think our patient's data has been pulled for nefarious purposes," and then they immediately got slapped with a class action lawsuit
Oh,
because they're trying to be
okay.
transparent.
Right.
Because the ambulance chasing lawyers are like, "Oh, an opportunity to they shouldn't have let that data go." Well, they had to. They didn't have any choice, right? So this is the insane world we're living in right now, right? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. So,
Yeah, it's structurally it's an interesting thing. You mentioned there's a lot of players in here, right? You got the ONC, and I just interviewed Tom Keane, the national coordinator. I'm going to run some of his comments by you. Um, but you have, ONC issues this contract to the Sequoia Project to oversee TEFCA, and they're the RCE,
yeah.
the recognized coordinating. So there's a lot of acronyms. I almost put my wife to sleep with this. She was like, well, "Stop talking to me," and I'm like, "No, you don't understand." So they're the RCE. They're supposed to deal with the onboarding of the QHINs. Everybody's supposed to deal with the level below, right? So Sequoia is supposed to deal with the QHINs, and they approved Health Gorilla and others. Epic is one of them as QHINs. So the QNs are supposed to do all their onboarding, and so Health Gorilla ultimately onboards GuardDog and others. There's participants. There's also sub-participants. So there's lots of layers here.
Yep.
And then when everything goes down, you have this sort of back and forth between GuardDog and Health Gorilla, as far as I read it, GuardDog has admitted, we were not doing the right thing. Health Gorilla said we didn't know they weren't doing the right thing. And Sequoia Project says, well, Health Gorilla was supposed to be dealing with that. So, we don't go down that level. I mean, I'm going to try and talk to them too. I'm trying to do
Right.
this one at a
And
time.
if you look at their website and they advertise to lawyers, we can get you clinical data. Maybe that should be a clue.
Health Gorilla,
No, the what was it
GuardDog.
called? The guard, yeah, GuardDog.
Yeah. 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 So, yeah, so there's lots of layers here, and it makes someone like yourself, when you look at this and you're saying, where's the accountability, right? Where's the accountability? Um, and it seems it's odd. Its whole thing is very odd, right? Because if I have my timeline correct, around October of last year is when Epic says to Health Gorilla, QHIN to QHIN, and in front of Sequoia Project says something to the effect of, something wrong is going on here. There's something wrong going on here.
Yeah.
Now, nothing. I don't know what happened between that and Epic filing the lawsuit early this year, but something unsatisfactory happened.
Yeah.
Right? Epic didn't get satisfaction. They don't just file lawsuits for fun, as far as I could
Right.
imagine.
Yeah.
So that to me says there may be some issue here with the governance, right? Some things did not happen to Epic's satisfaction. Is
Exactly.
that your reading of it? Am I seeing this right?
That is my read, but I want to toss in a very an additional important point, which is that the way that Epic is handling this, which I think is a very responsible way of doing it, is so Epic has lots of councils made up of Epic customers for various things, right? All the different specialty areas, and one of them is for this area. How are we sharing data, and how should we be sharing data? And so the evidence. Now, I'm not on that committee. I know some people that are, and so the evidence was presented, and some of the decisions here were made based on it was, in other words, it's not just Epic. It's Epic, and Epic customers
Right,
are
right, right,
collectively looking at this and making some decisions, which probably is related to what I said earlier about some health systems were additional parties to this lawsuit, right?
right.
So, anyways, it's not only Epic. I think Epic's doing the honorable thing by like putting their name out there, right? Because Epic continually it does, in my opinion, the right thing, like several years ago in the initial information blocking regs when they came out. And Epic said, and many of Epic customers agreed, we need to be able to at least advise patients what they're doing before they share their entire medical record with some shady company that's not beholden to HIPAA security, right? Um, and for that, they got pilloried as
I
being
remember.
against information blocking. I was just arguing with somebody on LinkedIn about this a week ago. People still say, "Oh, Epic is against information sharing. Their information blocking." First of all, as Epic customers, if there's information blocking going on, it's the Epic customer that's configuring that, not
Right.
Epic. And all that Epic did was put some very common sense thoughts out there, which ultimately were incorporated into the regs, which means that when a patient does do that, they go through this little process, say, okay, you are about to release your whole information, your whole medical
Right.
record to this company. Here's the data. Here's how long they're going to have access to it. Are you sure you're okay with that? Yes. Okay, great. Boom. The data goes, right? So I think that's a very good speed bump to have. And
Yeah.
part of what's going on now is now reasonable people can disagree about this part about, hey, we need to make it easier on that average Medicare beneficiary in the US that has, I'm going to get the exact stats wrong, but five five or six doctors on three or four different EHRs, right? And it's too hard to go to each doctor and go through each portal. And so you ought to be able to just prove who you are with one of the IL2 standard identity proofing, right? And then from there, you just ought to be able to get all your data, right? Um, which sounds great in theory. But then you get into, we have the system set up that does, so yes, you got to go to each individual provider and go through those checks and balances with that provider's EHR portal. But there's some really good safeguards in there. You know, in pediatrics, we have the additional complexity of adolescent privacy and parental rights, and the fact that somebody just lost a parental right after a custody battle, you know, to rights to the data, right? But they know all the information of their own kid. Like these are things that we have to deal with.
Hmm.
And it seems like maybe I think we're at risk with some of the current proposed, the individual access services. That's part of what's on the table now. I think we may be dangerously close to oversimplifying some of this. But so that's part of the current controversy.
All right, very good. Yeah, I remember that whole thing with Epic with the interoperability, and they did get a lot of heat for that.
Mhm.
But there's no way I can study this process of what happened and not have a little bit of admiration for Epic surfacing this issue. I
Right.
mean, this was a QHIN. They should not have to have been the ones to deal with this. It should have been Sequoia as
Yeah.
the RCE
Yeah.
or ONC. It should not have been F. It's like a sibling. You don't count on your siblings to manage each other. The parent does that,
It's
right? Like, why didn't you tell on your brother?
Somebody's got to be responsible, you know. Look, I started my professional life as a surface warfare officer in the Navy. You know, if the ship runs aground, the captain can't say, "Well, it was the officer of deck that ran aground. It wasn't my fault." You know, if you're gonna be in charge, you got to be in charge, right?
Yeah, and so they said, hey, I'm assuming, and again, I'm going to try and talk to someone over there, but I'm assuming, again, we don't want to do this. We brought it through the governance channels, but for some reason, I would love some transparency, some public information about what happened between October and the filing of the lawsuit. What did Sequoia do? What was the investigation? What happened? We don't know. Do we
Right.
know
No, no,
anything?
I don't know anything about that. No.
Right. So all very fascinating, but Epic takes it on and they move forward. Um, what what does someone like you who do you talk to internally? Who are you getting advice from? Your legal counsel, your privacy officer? You have to be talking to someone and saying, here's what's going on. Here's what I think. The legal person would say, well, here's what we're required to do. The privacy person would listen to your concerns. This is all happening in real time. And so how do you handle it? What's your advice to other CIOs on how they should be handling this?
Sure. Well, first of all, where do I get my information from? It's from well, first of all, I follow Brendan Keeler. You mentioned his name earlier to keep up on all these legal cases. He's great at that. I don't.
Yep.
He clearly does not sleep. He has a day job too, I think. Um, but also, I'm on the CHIME Policy Steering Committee.
Uh-huh.
And so I am blessed to be able to get on with them once a week, which is both uh, the Chime staffers that follow all this very closely and put
Hmm.
together our, point papers and hey, what should our, you know, what should our stance? What should the industry stance be on this, along with fellow health system CIOs that are on this? And we all talk about how we're approaching it, including a lot of colleagues at much larger health systems that sometimes have more resources and more, government relations resources than we do. So that's where I am plugged in and hopefully staying up on some of this.
Okay. But my questioning, my line of thinking, my understanding, no big errors that you're seeing. I'm not way off the mark on anything.
I'm sorry, no big errors.
On what the way I'm seeing and understanding what has happened and the situation around TEFCA and all this.
Right. I think it's what we just covered,
Yeah.
and then also some of the current policy proposals that the provider community is pushing back on a few things, like how that like what we just covered with the
Hmm.
I've proven who I am. Now I don't even have to go to the my provider's portal to get the data. Just give me all my data. Um, That's the point of controversy right now. Like I was saying earlier, reasonable people can agree we ought to make it easier to get your data,
Hmm.
but there have to be some checks and balances here. I mentioned the pediatrics um, issue before. One of the tricky things with that is even when you have so take away the adolescent privacy, take away the dad that just lost parental rights in a custody case, just a parent trying to do the best thing for their kid and downloading their entire medical record into some app that they just found on the App Store that is supposedly going to help them and their kid manage their chronic disease better. Okay. That parent is downloading their kid's medical record to some app that may be run by not good people, right? And that is not HIPAA protected because we have not, from a legal perspective, extended those HIPAA security requirements, right? Which is something we absolutely should be doing, and everybody talks about, but nobody's done yet, right?
Right.
Um, and so, and then that their kids' PHI is going to be out there forever, right? And the kid can't even consent to this. Yeah, it's the parent making the decision,
Hmm.
right? So it's just an additional compounding risk factor of if you make a mistake with that and you download it into the app that's the next Cambridge Analytica that's going to do inappropriate things, now you're putting your kids' data at risk, not just your own data at risk, right? So that is a reason why we in the pediatric community have like maybe uh, the hair on the back of our neck goes up even a little faster,
Right.
perhaps, than sometimes on the adult side because of that.
All right, very good. I want to run a few things by you that Dr. Keane said and see if they make you feel any better or anything like that. He told me, quote, ONC is looking at creating additional requirements for onboarding and additional vetting procedures. He said things will get, quote, better sooner rather than later, and emphasized that the government has, quote, a pretty strong whip hand. He made the point a number of times that they can pursue legal action and consequences without sort of a lot of jumping through hoops, that they had quite a bit
Sure.
of power. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, that's great. That's precisely what the provider community was asking for, and that letter was sent in like stronger controls over that. And I'm sure in somewhere in the contract language, there's got to be some ability to do that. Obviously, the Justice Department can go after anybody who's doing anything illegal, and where do the lines get drawn on what's illegal versus just what sort of gray
Hmm.
area. I can't comment on the details there. But it makes sense that ultimately the government has the power to do this if they have the people to do it, right?
Right. He described these incidents as trust failures. He called them edge cases,
Yeah.
and said they needed to be hemmed in. Is that fair in your mind, calling it an edge case, or you see it more of as a core problem?
I do not have enough perspective to know whether edge case is I'm sure he knows a lot more than I do about that, so I'll go with
All
that.
right.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like we're doing the game show thing. I'll go with
Yeah,
20 on
right.
that, Bob.
Yeah,
All
right.
right.
Yeah. Mm.
All right, I got one for you here. How about this? This would never mind. I won't say it. How about the Sequoia Project's public response to the letter of the 75 health systems? They said they appreciate the engagement and the recommendations will be considered.
Right. I prefer the ONC's response to Sequoia's response. Absolutely.
I am going to try and speak to
Yeah.
someone over there. So, but
Yeah.
that seems a little light. But anyway,
Yeah. So I'll say something else
yeah,
about what basically ONC's take on this is. Hey, this is an edge case. We're going to go after them. We're going to take care of it. That's exactly what we're asking for. Make an example so that of some folks, so that for the bad actors, so that there's not more bad actors. Right?
yeah.
You
You
don't.
know,
It will. Even if it's an edge case today, it won't stay an edge case if the people that are doing inappropriate things are don't have consequences. Right.
yeah. It just blows my mind. As soon as this was created, someone saw an opportunity. a nefarious up like that. That's wild to me that there's people out there that probably were reading the proposal because this probably took years. I don't remember it, but notice the proposed rules, rulemaking, this and that, and someone looked at this and was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna be a sub participant. I'm gonna
Yeah,
get it's." But I guess people will make money where they can.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Again, just any further advice to your CIO colleagues out there on navigating this exchange dynamic and just making sure that they've fully informed the people internally that need to know what's going on? Because again, this is a lot of alphabet soup. This is a lot of information. There's a lot of nuance here. But what would you say, like, hey, at a minimum, my peers, here's what you want to be communicating internally, and here's who you want to be telling?
Sure. Probably just the obvious, obviously talking to your legal and compliance and government relations, just to make sure you're on the same page internally for some of this, right? And then how you communicate with your patient population to the extent that does need to happen. That's a really sticky one, right? So so Health Gorilla case comes out, we all looked and went to see how many patients data was being pulled through Health Gorilla. Like, what do we do with that now?
Mm-hmm.
Those are some sticky legal issues.
Let's talk for a few more minutes. Let's talk a little bit about the privacy issues you were talking about. Um, you know, Sometimes when regulations come down around privacy, as you were saying, when those regulations hit the ground, they can be a little jarring or a little difficult to implement. Sometimes, and usually it has to do with granularity, right? We want to see this field, we want to see that field. Only certain physicians or you should be able to decide, I want this
Yeah.
physician to see this field, that want to see that field, which is interesting to put down on paper. But for someone like you who's got to implement it and has a vendor in the middle, right? The
Yes.
vendor's probably operating the software. Is it sometimes just, hey, you guys know what the regulation is. I have to be able to do this. That's on your end to deliver it with the next upgrade. Just tell me how that works.
Exactly. Well, so one of the many nice things about being on Epic instead of with a lesser EHR vendor is that we do trust them to interpret the regs, put what needs to be put into the next software release, so that we can be compliant, right? Now, there are certain limits to that, even with Epic's resources. Once again, in the pediatrics community, you have different adolescent privacy laws in every state.
Hmm.
That's what's a little hard. That's a little hard for Epic to program to, right? It's one thing to do national standards, another thing to accommodate every state. And so there's we everybody, all pediatric organizations struggle, and really, and of course, a lot of adult systems that have pediatric patients, right? And you're a large system in seven hospitals in 7 states, and you got 7 different adolescent privacy laws to accommodate in one EHR. So
Hmm.
it gets pretty sticky. But as a general concept, within the Epic community, we pay attention to this stuff. We see what's coming. We can sort of trust that Epic is going to implement what we need to do to be compliant. We still have to put it in and do the build and make decisions and do configurations and talk to legal and talk to compliance and talk to government relations and talk to our providers, right, about what needs to happen. I mean, information blocking and releasing of data and the timing of what diagnostics get released with what delays and getting providers are sometimes still reluctant in certain cases to no, I should be the one telling the patient that test results. Yes, but we already asked the patient if they wanted to have their test results released as soon as possible, understanding that sometimes that means they'll get it before their doctor has told them that. The
Hmm.
patient has already clicked that button in MyChart. It's like
Right.
those are some of the challenging cultural, things we still have to deal with.
Yeah, it's interesting. So beyond just what you want to do, sort of clinically speaking, for the benefit of the patient in terms of data exchange, much of this is informed by what you have to do based on regulation. Theoretically, when they're putting together those regulations, they're taking into account the technologies and what is possible. They're not asking for things that are impossible, but you tell me if I'm wrong. And so, taking all that sort of dynamic into account, you mentioned being on the CHIME Policy Steering Committee. Um, there's advocacy, right? That's a huge, probably should be extremely important part of what CIOs are up to. You have to try and inform the policies that are going to come out that are going to determine what you have to do, right? To sort of sit on the sideline, I don't know, because then, you get what you get. You're going to get what you get, even if you try and be part of the process, but at least it's better. At least you can be a voice for informing the policymakers of what technology currently will allow for and not, and also bring the voice of what you think should be done from a clinical point, because you're getting that information, trying to marry all this stuff together. I know it's not easy for you. I know it's not easy for ONC. I know everyone's trying to do the right thing. Sometimes there's a misstep, which again is probably what we've been talking about, a misstep that can be rectified. That's what Dr. Keane indicated. This can be rectified. This will be rectified. As much as it seems odd, some of it when you look into it and head shaking, um, you do trust in the good intentions there, and especially on Epic's part. There's a lot of Epic haters out there, but I mean, I've looked at many of the things they've done, and you can't but say they look like really solid intentions here. Like, oh, they wouldn't have bothered. So anyway, I guess the biggest question is around advocacy and what you think your peers should be doing in terms of trying to shape policy.
Sure. Well, I completely agree that this is important. I mean, I started in healthcare with a Master's of Public Health and Health Policy and Management. And so, right during the Clinton care debates in the early '90s and all, so I have a love for all this policy stuff. I think it's important. That's why I, am a member of the Chime Policy Steering Committee. And also the groupthink that goes on there, groupthink in the positive sense, not in the we put all our brains together and hopefully come up with something better than individually, making comments on the federal website about notice of proposed rulemaking. It's better to do these things together and write letters with 100 health systems signed on, right?
Yeah. So you say get out there, get involved. I would imagine you're a big fan of Chime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Very good. JD, any final thought, final word of wisdom for our listeners out there? You've been around a while.
I have been around for a while. That is true. I guess what I to put up I've said some I don't know, perhaps some cynical things to put a positive spin on this, right? I applaud the administration for setting the bar. How can we set the bar higher? How can we further, with all the HTI stuff going on and yes, here, okay, we've had fire standards for a while. Now we're actually going to use them for this and for prior auth. And the industry will do this, right? There was a lot of attention paid to the patient facing. The patients will be able to download their record with the USCDI and all that and put on providers and put on payers to get data to the patient. Version 1 of that didn't say a whole lot about how providers and payers are going to talk to each other. With
Hmm.
all that friction that we all know is so costly and delays care. And so now we're getting around to some of that piece, right? So to put a positive spin on this, I think that being a little more aggressive with some of this standard setting and policy is exactly government's role
Okay.
to be doing. So I applaud that.
All right, JD. Excellent to talk to you today. Thank you for taking some time out for me. I appreciate it, and I hope we can catch up with you again down the road.
My pleasure. Great chatting with you, Anthony.
Have a great day. Thank you.